This is Memorial Day weekend, traditionally a day to honor our war dead. The official holiday started 3 years after the Civil War ended, on May 5th, 1868. The head of an organization of former Union soldiers and sailors, the Grand Army of the Republic, established Decoration Day as a time for the nation to decorate the graves of the war dead with flowers, and Major General John A. Logan declared it should be May 30th. The first large observance was held that year at Arlington Cemetery across from the Potomac River from Washington. The cemetery already held the remains of 20,000 Union dead and several hundred Confederate dead. Across the North and South, several towns claimed to be the first Memorial Day. One of my favorite claims is in Columbus, Mississippi. On April 25th, 1866, a group of women visited the cemetery to decorate the graves of the Confederate soldiers who had fallen at the battles at Shiloh. And nearby were graves of Union soldiers, neglected because they were the enemy. Disturbed at the sight of the bare graves, the women placed some of their flowers on those graves as well. I like this story because the women also honored the dead of their enemies. And this is a significant fact that was lost 3 years later, when at Arlington Cemetery, only the graves of the Union soldiers were honored. What shift in our psyches would occur if instead of remembering only those killed by our enemies, we would also remember those enemies that we've killed? War is a human tragedy, yet it is so common one could declare that it's normal. A necessary evil, and we can have long debates on the definition of necessary and evil on other days in different sermons. But if we remember only our dead, then we see ourselves only as victims. War is something that happened to us, something we were dragged into against our will. And this absolves us from our responsibility. If we were really surprised by war, we would not have such a large standing army. We are always partially culpable in the wars we fight. The nature of war is that atrocities are committed by both sides. There's a tendency to overlook our own atrocities and define them as the necessary evil. We want to hold that we are good people, occasionally forced to do bad things. When our enemies commit atrocities, we tend to think that they are revealing their true internal evil character. Our enemies probably see us in the same way. Reviewing the wars that this nation has been in, it can be hard to determine who was right and who was wrong. Even starting with the Revolutionary War, what made the colonists fight? The battle cry was taxation without representation is tyranny. So basically our revolution was a tax revolt that left about 4,400 colonial soldiers dead, and the British lost about 10,000. And looking at how odd this is in the history of British colonialism, and looking at it 200 years later, how much more tangibly free are we than New Zealand, Canada, and Australia, who kept their ties with England and eventually separated peacefully. Why were we the only colony to violently separate? Even India, which was a conquered country, managed to separate nonviolently. How would our history been different if our foreparents had been patient? And then once we were separate, the British couldn't let go and had to attack us again in 1812. And why did they feel the need to try to bring us back into the circle when we already made it quite clear that we didn't want to be part of the family? We lost at least 2,000 soldiers in that event. In 1846 to 1848, the USA went to war with Mexico. We lost about 1,800 soldiers, including those at the famed Alamo. Mexico lost around 8,000. We gained the area which would become the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. This was a significant war, and is probably America's most forgotten war. Perhaps it's less honored because, as a country, we realize that we truly were the aggressors in this war. It is more comfortable to assume that the states with Spanish-sounding names just somehow happened to become part of our country. Henry David Thoreau protested this war. It is during this war that he wrote Civil Disobedience. And this anti-war protest has become more famous than the war that it protested, and has sparked nonviolent resistance movements all over the world. The death tolls in these early wars pale in comparison to the Civil War. Over 500,000 died, as many from disease as from the battle. They were fighting over slavery. The North wanted slavery to stay in the Union, and the South wanted slavery to leave the Union, so that they could have leverage to higher prices by making the mills of New England compete with the mills of Old England. The emancipation of slaves did not become a cause until 2 years into the war, and even then only slaves in rebel states were freed. And even before that war, millions of those slave ancestors died in the Middle Passage, even before they came to this country. Many more died prematurely under the weight of hard labor. It's hard to understand how a country founded on liberty, tolerated slavery for so long. Was the Civil War inevitable? Historians with greater knowledge than I have wondered and debate. I always wonder, could there have been a better way of fighting this war than killing all these people? If people hadn't died in such number, would there be such a vested interest in fighting the Civil War today? The dead were family, not in some distant metaphorical way, not in the way the people in China are all part of our human family, but real family, brothers, cousins, fathers. And perhaps that's what made the fighting so intense, but made the sorrow so much greater. But even after the war, when we were forced to have memorials, our hunger for carnage continued. Soldiers went on to further battles in the West versus Native Americans. These people were dehumanized and called savage. Let us remember them also this Memorial Day. The war with Native Americans was the last time our army fought on our continent. In 1898, we went international, fighting Spain over the territories of Cuba and the Philippines. We were a world power. In the 20th century, we would fight 2 world wars. And looking at the numbers, it just is devastating that in the First World War, over 8.5 million soldiers died. And that was just the soldiers. Many more civilians died. The U.S. lost over 50,000. And 6 million civilians died across the world. In the Second World War, we lost 300,000 soldiers out of 50 million soldier and civilian deaths worldwide. We killed over 100,000 just dropping the bomb. Our losses were but a small fraction of the world's, as large as ours were. The world suffered immensely in that war. In the Korean War, 225,000 Chinese soldiers died, about 175,000 North Koreans, 47,000 South Koreans, and about 33,000 Americans. And about 700,000 civilians died in this war. Vietnam, we lost 58,000 of a total of over 1 million people dead. This war, it was particularly difficult to determine who were the soldiers and who were the civilians. In the Gulf War, we lost only 289 people, both in battle and out of the battle theater. Early estimates claimed that we killed 100,000 Iraqi soldiers, and later the Defense Department lowered that number to 9,000. Getting statistics on war dead is always difficult. I've gotten some of these from some summaries, but there's always interest on one side or another, either inflating or deflating the cost, inflating to show how great the victory was, or deflating them to show that we really didn't kill that many people. And so these numbers, although I've been doing this litany, it's not been to get a sense of accuracy, but a sense of the weight of how many people worldwide have died. And it's not just been us, it's been all over. Even the numbers around September 11th, I've seen so many numbers that I can only say around 3,000 people died on that day. And then when people talk about the numbers that have died in Afghanistan, those numbers run the gamut. It's hard to know what the exact numbers are, but people are dying. It's very hard to determine a refugee from an escaping Taliban soldier. This terrorism is a new type of warfare. It's hard to know when we can consider it won. For the moment we let down our guard, we're vulnerable again. But terrorism is not new to our shores. Nearly 1,800 blacks were lynched between 1900 and 1950. And this past week we convicted a man who bombed a black church in the 60s. In addition to the war dead, I want us to also remember those who strove for peace and who were murdered. From Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King Jr. in the USA, Norbert Čapek, a Czech Unitarian killed in the Holocaust, Oscar Romero, a Catholic archbishop who was killed in El Salvador in 1980. And this list could go on and on. Too many people have died. We may have our judgments about which deaths were just and which ones were unjust. And somewhere in the world, someone disagrees with us. What is this disease we call war? What is it in the human psyche that believes that this is the best way to solve our differences? How do we honor the dead? Very carefully. As a person who tends towards pacifism, I have to caution myself not to sit back in smug self-righteousness. Because war sometimes grabs people in a way where the ability to make decisions that we can make in the comfort of our living room reading a book make no sense. Some people were heroes, acting valiantly in chaotic situations. Sometimes the choices are all bad. Kill or be killed. Turn away the refugees at your door to feed your family. Abandon your native land or fight a war you don't believe in. All these decisions, given their context, can be the moral decision to make. But the decision that's left unmade also could have been a right decision. And we can't look at the past with our self-assuredness and say, if I was there, I would have done it better. This is not an easy world we live in. Many people have fallen. Our enemies and our friends are in the ground. They died for many reasons. Loyalty, stupidity, for God and country, friendship, democracy, liberty, honor, fate, hope. By accident, by suicide, betrayal, and courage, and cowardice. The reasons are so many and so convoluted. The noble mingles with the shameful within each human heart. What can we do as survivors to honor them? I think they've died in vain if we cannot learn some lesson from their lives and their deaths. It's up to us to give their lives meaning, but at the same time, we need to remember the words of Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address, where he said, "We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that a nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract." What can we truly do to honor or dishonor the countless millions who have died? Whether or not they have received eternal punishment or eternal reward is not up to us. We might simply mourn that they are no more and wonder what songs were never written, what paintings were never painted, and what inventions went on to an early grave. The world vibrates with what we have lost. We remember the fallen and hope for justice. We seek not vengeance or punitive retaliation. We seek restorative justice. We recognize that relationships have been broken. Reconciliation is possible, and we can rebuild after a war. A man showed up on my doorstep last Friday. His father was from Laos. His people were the Hmong, who fought with the U.S. against the North Vietnamese. And after we pulled out, their people were in dire straits from the surrounding tribes people. This man had driven his SUV from Mount Airy and asked if he could pick some of the bamboo that is behind the house I rent. This 2-acre bamboo forest tucked up against the freeway is apparently one of the largest in the region. For his people have traveled often to my door, about every 2 months, to find a taste of the home they left behind. War has brought these strangers to my door, and we smile and we laugh about how far they travel to get fresh bamboo, but it's a short distance compared to the country they can never return to. And I wonder if this moment of sharing is what our humanity is all about. Out of tragedy, we find a way. Mixing old ways with the lessons we have learned. Remembering the pain, yet hoping for a better future. These new Americans, chewing bamboo, remembering those who died in their village, and tell stories to their children, and warn them not to forget who they are, yet know that life cannot be like the days of old. We must work towards the day when the world will live in peace. I welcome your response.
I've been mulling this issue of war for 40, 45 years. Never have come up with a good answer of why we as human beings seem to go in this ditch all the time. And my I want to say fatalistic answer is that we are just, unfortunately, genetically fixed this way. And that we can't seem to do the right stuff often enough among enough of us to counter the problem of falling in the ditching. I don't like that answer, though. And I've watched religions go after each other, all sorts. And one of the reasons I'm you is I think we find the middle ground. We try. And I know we've got a lot of cultural things that reinforce the antagonism, but I think I'd like to get over the competitiveness that I have, that I was born with, that it's me. And I see it now in Charlie, and I see it in lots of us. I mean, I can get it out, almost anybody, by just setting up the dynamic. And my question is, does anybody have a better answer? I don't like the fatalistic answer that I've come up with. An easier answer than, war, or you just got to keep working at it. Those are two answers that are just very hard on us.
I'd like to respond to you, Phil. An anthropologist who study cultures that are non-domination cultures versus domination culture, there's one difference, and the difference is that there's social payoff for doing things that are good for the group versus social payoff for what's good for the individual. And that our culture and the cultures of the world right now
you're suffering like that, it will happen. And religion simply gets involved and builds on this and creates a sense of, we have the luxury way, we are entitled to do whatever.
I think you have to ask yourself a simple question. Not so much what am I willing to die for, what am I willing to kill for? And that's a different thing. And I think that if we could ask ourselves that individually and as a culture, maybe we would choose not to strike out and find some other way to solve our differences. Because once you've decided, I'm not willing to kill for this, then you have to talk.
Found out that there's a hell last week at Wednesday. Stuck in a car for about 45 minutes with a fundamentalist Christian. And the thought of spending eternity with like-minded people was my concept of hell. But we went to war in this setting. We was talking about the damn Muslims. The damn Muslims who were trying to achieve paradise. And I asked him, what is the difference in what he's trying to achieve and what you're trying to achieve? Is he that much different from you? And religion is the crux of most wars. That's where we're coming down to. All the blood has been shed over, I'm right, you're not. And that's kind of what we came to. You ever wonder about hell?
One of the things I want to mention is, I know I was,
Speak up, Jerry.
I was in Vietnam, and I know there was 58,000 people there from that war that seemed to go on forever. One of the statistics that does not include is the effect that Vietnam has had on people after we got back. There's a tremendous number of us veterans that committed suicide, that have been committed to hospitals, that are homeless for whatever reason. And it's a shame that 10 months and 2 days of my life has had such a deleterious effect on my life ever since then. So just, the 58,000 is just a small part of the number of people who are affected deleteriously by Vietnam.
You started speaking about Arlington Cemetery and the original Memorial Days. We need to remember that Arlington Cemetery is on the grounds of Robert E. Lee's family home.
Two things I would take. What I would say a step further is not teaching our kids necessarily to accept violence. It's teaching the competitive spirit in them. When we do that through schools, through separating AGs, the competitiveness, the kids that aren't AG, the kids who are an AG, and there's a competitive spirit there. I think it's the competition as much as it is to accept violence. And the second thing is it's kind of a twist. It's a circle because the competitive spirit is what drives us to be the United States that we are. That we can enjoy the freedoms that we do, that we have air conditioning, that we are advanced as we are. If you look at a lot of the countries that aren't as competitive as us, I mean, they're not as advanced either. You know, technologically, I'm not saying advanced. There's some things to get different.
You had one.
Yeah, but mine's not directly related to
So many different thoughts. There's a reason justice has a blindfold on. When Americans think it's justice, I don't think Afghanis think that's justice. A fellow Vietnam vet cites 58,000 in-country plus untold thousands after. He doesn't mention the millions of Vietnamese that were killed fighting their idea of a just war. Their leader, Ho Chi Minh, was referred to as George Washington of their country. Initially in 1946, he put a constitution out that looked almost exactly like ours. But he was the enemy. He was the bad guy. I wonder if at that time they had the term collateral damage. And they look at collateral damage like we look at collateral damage. Competition has always been used as an example of why this country is so great. I think the reason this country has come so far in so short a period of time is that they were protected by the seas. They had two weak neighbors. They had a combination of oppressed people from the rest of the world that were able to creatively, in peace and understanding, work together. God has a sense of humor. If there is a God or a supreme being, he has a sense of humor. He laughs at human beings who consider themselves, a higher form of being. And then look at the wars that we continue to do. Is that the acts of rational human beings? I can keep going.
And I'm sure we all could keep going, and I encourage us to keep going during coffee hour and throughout our lives, because this issue will be with us for our entire lives. Please join in singing the song that's in the insert. It's Side by Side. You might recognize the tune as Rank by Rank. These are some alternative words written by a Unitarian minister. And also in your insert, one of the lines of music is inexplicably missing. So for those of you who need the notes, you need to look at the hymn, which is 358. But for those of us who muddle along with the words, all the words are there.
Immortality. It is eternity now. I am in the midst of it. It is about me in the sunshine. I am it, as the butterfly in the light-laden air. Nothing has to come. It is now. Now is eternity. Now is the immortal life.